If you haven't found it yet, keep looking and don't settle.
Yeah, this is Houston. We're copying. Everything is go here.
We shall fight on the beaches and in the streets. We shall never surrender.
I'm in it just to rewrite history, cause I'm in the mood to label us the leaders of the new school. This ain't for the radio, can't find this on YouTube. This the type of killing that these critics ain't used to.
You're a group of happy rebels. You've said no to the rules of the game and the regulations of the day. You've said no to the conventional wisdom. You're all originals.
In this day and age, I got time for innovation, time to be creative, time to make the waste of my time on critics.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for listening to 90 Proof Wisdom Podcast. We're here today with Randy Watt to discuss a little bit about Afghanistan and how we can help people out. Don't forget to subscribe to 90 Proof Wisdom Podcast. If you love us, let us know. If you don't, let us know. And thank you again for listening. Love y'all. Hey, good morning, everyone. We're here again today with Randy Watt. As you guys know, we had him earlier on the podcast discussing some of his background. He served in Afghanistan, and I thought it would be a great time to reach out to him today again to talk about the craziness that's going on in Afghanistan and kind of what's led us here. And I thought, what a better person to reach to than Randy. So we've invited him back. I know it's soon, but it's timing is everything, and this is an important time for us to sit down and learn more and get some insight from someone that's been there early on and then served multiple times, right?
Yeah, well, I went to Afghanistan one time. I was there 0102 very early on. I was a major then, Special Forces major, what's called an AOB, Advanced Operations Base Commander. So I started out in Karshi-Kanabat, Uzbekistan, which is where we were operating out of, where the Special Forces teams were operating out of. And I was what's called the Isolation Facility Commander, December, January, February, first part of March timeframe. Then right around first part of April, I went down to host Afghanistan, East Central Afghanistan, as the AOB commander on the ground. And so I ran the war in host province and part of Paktia and Paktika provinces. I had two Special Forces A teams in host, down in host area with 250 Afghan militia. And I had two Special Forces A teams in Gardez with about 250 Afghan militia. And so we prosecuted the war. It was a special forces fight then. My mission was locate and destroy enemy forces, maintain a presence in the regional core area, deny sanctuary to the enemy, and we were very good at it. And it didn't start until later 02, fall of 02, really transitioning to a conventional fight, to a conventional kind of a war, large U.S. conventional military footprint in various places, which was the wrong shift, in our opinion, those of us on the special ops side. But it happened. It's past history. We can't do anything about it. But because I was in charge of that region, I was negotiating with warlords. I put the regional governor in place, and it was my responsibility to protect him while we built his security force. We were doing training missions for the Afghans in actual combat operations. We were doing a wide variety of things necessary. Very quickly, we had destroyed the Taliban in terms of their military structure, October, November. By December of 01, we had destroyed the military structure of the Taliban, and they'd broken into small groups. We had driven Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda was operating very openly in Kabul and in the surrounding major cities, supported by the Taliban. They were in Kandahar. You may remember when Al-Qaeda was driven to the Tora Bora region, which is a very, very
mountains, rugged.
It's incredible. Yeah. And then March, we had Operation Anaconda, which was designed to destroy the Al-Qaeda remnants that were in the Tora Bora region. Kind of a famous thing, Operation Anaconda. It's painted as a prettier picture than it really was, because the operation was kind of messed up. There's a book by Sean Naylor called, I think it was called Not a Good Day to Die, which is about how messed up the Anaconda operation was. I was there for all of that stuff, and then I left late October of 02. So I was on the ground in command from April through October, working directly with the Afghans, working with the governors, working with the tribal elders and chieftains, trying to fix things with the warlords so they'd sit back and not create further issues. Dealing directly with the Haqqani network. It wasn't the Haqqani network then. Jalaluddin Haqqani was still alive.
Is he a good guy, bad guy?
Bad guy.
Okay.
And the Sirahuddin Haqqani, his son, is now the head of what's called the Haqqani network. There's a $5 million bounty, U.S. bounty, on Sirahuddin Haqqani's head. He's just been named the interior minister for the new Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. So I guess we're not going to try to collect on him, but he's on the high terrorist list, and he's now the interior minister of Afghanistan. And there is not a greater representation of how screwed up this whole thing has gotten.
So as a layman, right, I've never served in the military, and hindsight, I told you early, I was too weak. I was scared to death to serve. At 18, there's no way I could have pulled it off. It just made me nervous. I was afraid of the draft when 2001 happened, and I'm like, wait a second, I don't want to do it. I was just too weak and scared, but now I think they should do us like angry old men because I'm ready, right? And as a standard, just regular citizen, and we watch what's happening and the craziness and the pride that we carry as Americans, like, how did this all fall apart? What do we stand for really then, right? And so when we look at you and say, hey, help us kind of dissect where how we've evolved to this, where we had a mission that we wanted to go for, and then we just kind of ditch our people. Like, we have some allies and troops and Americans over there. How do you turn your back?
Yeah, I don't know. I retired as a colonel. I sat on the brigadier general's promotion list for 2 years and didn't get picked up, so it was time to retire. I had a total of enlisted and officer time, active duty and guard time of 33 years, 10 months to the day. I'm a graduate of the U.S. War College, which is the finishing school for generals. I spent a year in Carlisle Barracks at the U.S. Army War College, which is all about strategy, which is all about tying those efforts of national effort together. We speak in terms of the four primary powers for accomplishing our national interests, and we call it DIME, D-I-M-E, diplomatic, informational, military, and economic. And so State Department and other government entities, play this joint role. People always referred to the M, military, as the big M, as they should. A lot of Americans don't understand the whole dynamic of countries and leaders and so on. But think of the 5th grade. Back, I'm quite a bit older than you, but you might have still been doing recess when you were in elementary school. Think of the playground, 5th grade, the playground.
Oh,
right?
Dodgeball,
during
volleyball,
recess, right?
Crazy fun.
Right? You had
monkey bars,
leaders.
Oh, yeah.
Right? You had little groups.
Cliques.
Of people, cliques. And this group, wanted the tetherball pole. This group didn't want to relinquish it. All right. How did we do that? You had this group that decided for whatever reason they wanted to bully that group. How did those things get worked out? In fact, in my opinion, it's one of the great failures of our current education system is we don't have recess because you learned a lot out there. Now everybody's
pecking order, king of the hill.
Yeah. Oh, whatever happens, don't let anybody be bullied. Well, I got punched in the mouth in the 7th grade by Roger McKinney, and I learned a very, very valuable lesson. I could lay on the ground and moan and cry, or I could get up and I knew I was going to lose, and I did lose, but Roger McKinney got marked up pretty good too. He was 7th grade, or I was 7th grade, he was 9th. And so, but the problem for me was laying there on the ground, was there was a certain young lady watching. That kind of leveraged something there, right? So if you think of that dynamic, think of foreign countries. All right, some are bullies, some are gentlemen, some are soft, some are hard, but everybody has something they want to gain. So diplomacy is the art of discussing and negotiating and compromising and reaching agreement so that you accomplish some of your aims and I accomplish some of my aims. Well, in the international arena, the single largest thing, all right, that allows for competent negotiations is to have a position of power, a quiet position of power. That's what the military does. All right. When we start trying to deal with a bully in a foreign country who's bullying his neighbors, and it's in direct contrast to our national interests on the ground in that region. We have this iron fist that is inside that velvet glove that is doing the negotiating. If you don't have an iron fist in that glove, all right, it's just a piece of cloth, and nobody cares and nobody listens. And then there's another important component of that, and that is you've got to bring friends to the discussion. You've got to have allies. Right? You've got to have countries that want to work with you and are willing to jointly conduct events with you.
So the media is saying we're turning our back onto them and to our allies.
And that's exactly what has happened. This is the worst. This situation is the greatest moral failure by a presidential administration in the history of our nation. Period.
I would disagree.
Not just because of what's happening on the ground, but because what it's done across the globe. I mean, when Parliament stands up,
censors.
When British Parliament stands up and says we will not do a joint effort or operation with the United States until there's a change in administration, okay, and literally condemns by word, condemns the actions of the United States and how they're handling Afghanistan. That hasn't happened since 1775. The British have, we went to war, we became friends, they came back in 1812, tried to push us around, all right, burned our capital, all right, we kicked the crap out of them again, and they went home, we became friends, and we've worked together all over the world. No greater friend to the United States than Great Britain. And now they're saying, we're not doing a thing with you. And you look around the country, what message have we sent to future countries we may have to work with to solve problems that are in our national interest?
To me, we'll just quit.
Yeah. Well, we're your friend today, but we're gonna fail you and quit on you a year from now.
And not even tell you that we're going to do it. You'll just see that we did it.
Yeah.
That's how I feel, but I may be wrong. Again, I'm not. That's what it looks like.
Yeah.
So how did the whole cookie crumble? What do you see?
So normally, the way it starts, you can start with the Trump agreement, but and this is what President Biden and his team keep throwing out there. My hands were tied. The Trump agreement. No, the Trump agreement had certain conditions built into it. You have to recognize we hadn't had a serviceman killed in 18 months in Afghanistan, right? Since the Trump administration took over and sent a strong message to the Taliban. Look, here are those conditions. One, we're going to keep a small presence in Afghanistan. We're not going to have a big troop footprint, but we're going to keep Bagram Airfield and we're going to keep special operations on. Now, think about the strategic value of a footprint in Afghanistan. If you're worried about Russia, directly north. If you're worried about China, directly east. If you're worried about Pakistan, a nuclear power, whom we give tremendous amounts of aid to quietly, annually, as part of their process and attempt. If you're worried about what Iran, directly west, okay? If you're worried about that buffer of those stands, if you're worried about Turkmenistan, if you're worried about Uzbekistan, if you're worried about Tajikistan and above it, Kazakhstan, as a buffer in that region to help prevent Chinese expansion and or Russian expansion, although Russia's not in a situation economically right now where they can really do a lot of expansion. The thing in the Ukraine is about it, all right? That's about as far as they can reach right now. But China is the problem, right? China is the problem. But you look at that. What better place would there be to be strategically located
than Afghanistan,
right? To give your friends and even some fair weather friends like the Stans, to give your friends a sense that, look, they're here and they're available, right? So the Trump plan included keeping Bagram, keeping special operations and an intelligence footprint there, some conventional forces to protect the base and hold it. And it's essentially a launching platform. Think about it in terms of our counterterrorism strategy, right? Look, that region in terms of terrorism is fairly famous. And whether you're talking about the Islamic movement of Uzbekistan, which is an al-Qaeda-linked group, the IMU in Uzbekistan, whether you're talking about al-Qaeda or ISIS, which are on the ground in Afghanistan, what better way to deal with that than to have specialized forces on the ground in this small footprint who are doing strategic surgical missions to keep Al-Qaeda on its heels, to keep ISIS on its heels, so that it can't export its terror because it's too busy protecting its internal locations, bases, personnel, and so on. And so that was part of the Trump plan, was we're going to hold that little piece. We're going to be present. We're going to pay for it. We're going to pay you, pay your government. The other piece was, told the Taliban, no movement forward. No movement into the cities, all right? No taking over. You must learn to work with, and you must become a part of the legitimate government of Afghanistan. That was another piece that was required. And he was quite upfront about it. I mean, you can read the transcripts of what he said. You can listen to and he told the Taliban when he talked directly to them, I'm going to obliterate you. You don't follow this to the letter. I'm going to obliterate you on the ground. And for 18 months, the Taliban is out in those outer areas. They're in those valleys and areas, but they're not moving on. They're not killing. They're not murdering. They're doing their thing. Then January 20th occurs. We have a change in administration, and immediately the Taliban starts moving. All right? And we watch this period of time where they're moving in. They're taking over the larger cities. They're moving towards Kabul, but we're not doing anything. Because it's a new administration.
They're worried about other things.
Yeah, the Taliban are not afraid of being obliterated anymore, right? I mean, because they can see, they can read the tea leaves. They know which way this administration is going. And the administration is negotiating, the new administration is negotiating its own way out of Afghanistan as a very large political effort.
Sure.
So they're not paying attention to the impact or the effect of loosening the reins on the Taliban.
Do you think they're not paying attention, or do you think they don't care?
Part of me says, and I hate to think this way, part of me says it's part of a plan. And I'll mention that here in a minute. But so then what happens is we cut off the money. The new administration tells Afghanistan, by the way, you're on your own. Get your government form. You've got 300,000 well-trained soldiers, which they did not have. The military scoffed at that. We knew they didn't have that. You've got equipment, but that equipment was maintained by U.S. contractors. Right?
They didn't know what they were doing with it.
You don't teach people who don't know how to read, right?
How to maintain
computer systems, how to maintain, repair software systems, hardware systems, even simple weapons systems. You can train them how to be good foot soldiers. You can train them how to be good tactical level, ground level commanders. But in terms of large-term strategy and in terms of large-term capability, you have to have an educated force. You have to change the whole dynamic of how this country, the foundation that's underneath this country, in terms of education, economics, opportunity, and that takes generations. That isn't done in 20 years.
What's sad is like you're talking all these levels, and there's just a TV watcher when it comes to Afghanistan, right? Mm-hmm. That's the only thing we know. It's so different than what we perceive as just a standby citizen that watches
and what
the
we've been
news.
told.
Right. Well, what we're told every day on TV. You don't think about all these different levels, that they're working with people that can't read. They're working with people that are really, I mean, there's thousands of years into this system, and we're trying to help them evolve into something that may be better for them. But we don't understand that. We're just saying, hey, bad people, there's bad people there. We're going to send our troops in, and they're not going to bomb or destroy the World Trade Center again or anything like that, any other asset on our ground. So let's just fight over there. At a high level, that's the only thing I understood is if we keep the fight over there, they won't come here, and that's it. Right? That sounds pretty elementary, but that's really all we understand as media watchers, right?
Yeah.
So you have a different lens than we do.
Sure. But, okay, so back to the primary question of how did it all fall apart. So that's the start of it. Change administration, different administrative goals,
Trying to get
alliances and allegiances. The whole goal of the new administration coming in seemed to just undo the previous administration. That's what does the new administration do? Yeah, what do they do in the first week? They undo all the executive orders that undid all the previous Obama administration orders, of which Joe Biden was a part. So that happens, and there's a whole different focus on on the world, alliances, allegiances, and it's going to start with Afghanistan. We're going to get this great big political win by pulling everything out of Afghanistan, giving it back to the Afghanistan people, let them solve their problems. And everybody with any ounce of intellect, right, could see and knew, anybody that's in the know about that situation, that arena, that area, knew that was just another failure. That's why President Trump's plan was not to completely leave, and it was not to take the money away. It was to continue to shore up the growth of this Afghanistan government and keep the Taliban at bay. Because we went there for one purpose, and that was to ensure that that country never became the base of terrorism again. So we decide, the administration decides, we're going to pull everything out. The way this normally works, it's called a Non-Combatant Evacuation Operation, or a NEO. We speak in terms of a NEO, N-E-O, Non-Combatant Evacuation Operation. Normally what happens when we're doing that, the military, all right, is the supported command. They're the primary effort. And State Department is the supporting effort. Okay? That's to deal with the transportation. That's to deal with all the paperwork in terms of identities. That's to deal with the vetting. But the military has command because we have the training, the knowledge, the experience on large-scale logistic operations, and those kinds of things. For whatever reason, it was decided that the State Department would be the lead and the military would be the supporting element. Well, State Department has no understanding or capacity of how to do this in a hostile environment, in a rapidly collapsing environment, high-threat environment. So that was the first thing. The second thing was the presidential administration had decided on a certain number by certain dates. You're going to be down to this number of personnel by this date. When
disregard to everything else.
When you talk, let's talk about the tooth-to-tail ratio. So when the public is told, oh, there are 900 soldiers on the ground in Afghanistan, the picture you get in your head is 900 guys, dudes with helmets on and body armor and stuff full of magazines and an M4 and ready to fight. No, that's about 100 out of 700. You have clerks, you have cooks, you have drivers, you have aircraft mechanics, they're all military, right?
Right. But they're not gun holders necessarily.
The tooth to tail ratio, for every gunslinger there is in the military, there are about 7 support personnel in order to make that happen. So we call it the tooth to tail ratio is about 1 to 7. Right? So if you have 700 people on the ground, right,
only 100 gunslinger.
You got 100 armed guys to man gates. They can do that 12 hours a day, and then they have to be down to. So you have 50 guys ready at any given time to deal with hostilities. You could probably protect this building with that. Okay? Probably protect your fences in the surrounding area. That's it. How do you protect an airfield? How do you protect something,
it's miles.
Half the size of the Salt Lake Airport with gates all over the place so you have this Herculean effort. That's why we had to put 3,000 Marines back in. 3,000 Marines back in, right? It was because of the size of this effort. But we could only protect, to a degree,
Kabul.
No, not even Kabul. HKIA, Hamid Karzai International Airport. That's it. We weren't protecting Kabul. Hamid Karzai International Airport is just on the outskirts of Kabul. There's no way we could hold Kabul. So it fell. And since the U.S. Embassy is in the heart of Kabul, they moved the personnel to the airport to try to run operations. Well, all of their support systems were gone. All of their translators were gone because they're locals. Okay? All of their interviewers were gone because they're locals. And they're now in hiding because the Taliban saying anybody who supports the American effort needs to go. So this whole thing was like a very bad dream. Now, in the last few weeks, it has come out that the military told them that this isn't going to work and this is why, but they said we're going to do it anyway. It has come out that the intelligence agency said, look, there's a likelihood that the Afghan National Army and the Afghan government are going to collapse rapidly as the Taliban moves. And we believe the Taliban are capable of taking taking the capital in 3 to 4 weeks. Well, it took them 11 days. And so it just all fell apart. It was bad planning, bad understanding of the dynamics and the effort, failure to put the right people in charge. And now what are the after effects? Our allies are saying, not only did you screw this up, but we're not going to play anymore. Our future allies are saying, it's not smart to play with the United States, particularly with this administration, because they're going to leave you. Our enemies are laughing. China, which is our biggest enemy. And yes, there's this interesting juxtaposition, if you will, in terms of China, because keep in mind back there, even though we don't hear much about it, and even though nothing much is going on, keep in mind the Biden family connection to China.
Huge.
Yeah. Financial, economic efforts. And China is now inside Afghanistan.
And we left them, $250 million worth of stuff? Probably.
Well, not only that, the single largest untapped reserves of lithium in the world are in Afghanistan. Right? Chinese need lithium big time. Chinese control about 90% of the lithium market production now for batteries, electronics, all those things that we buy.
And we're taking all our cars that direction, so I mean.
Yeah. So everything related to that, it's huge. It's a huge piece. Taliban, Baradar, the Taliban leader, 4 days ago? He's standing at a press conference. Who's standing next to him? The Chinese ambassador, if you will. And the Taliban are saying, China is our largest ally. Okay? So here are these things, and you start connecting the dots and you go, okay, so I had a senior military friend who's retiring. He can't. These are his words. I can't take this anymore. These are his words. Look, at these high levels, you cannot be this incompetent. It has to be a plan. There has to be a plan behind this. So I'm not going to get down the conspiracy theory road, but you have to wonder, okay, how could we be this incompetent? How could our military generals fail us so greatly and still be generals? How could our senior State Department officials still try to claim a win, largest airlift operation ever run in the history of the United States? Nice try, not true, but you get the point. Bad planning, wrong outcomes,
wrong people,
poor management, wrong people, failure to recognize the long-term strategic impacts and effects. It's an absolute failure. It's an absolute disgrace.
It's pretty sad watching, right? You look at it, and I don't even understand why wouldn't they just destroy the American assets that were there? You see, there was some video of the helicopters.
They did some, yeah.
But some. Why didn't we just do the rest? Right?
Didn't have enough personnel or enough time.
Yeah. So from the time they said leave, you
can't. When I was
in
Baghdad in 06, 07, I was the counterterrorism advisor to the Iraqi National Counterterrorism Unit, and into the National Command Headquarters operated with my teams out of the FOB Shield, which is on the edge of Sadr City, near the Ministry of Interior, because we worked with the MOI commandos, and we worked with the National Command Center, which was the Ministry of Interior. Because that's where, in countries that are formed like that, when you see Ministry of Interior, that's who runs your national police forces. That's who maintains internal security. That's where your internal intelligence agencies are. Ministries of Defense, they defend against external enemies and threats. Ministry of Interior defends against internal threats. So we're working with the Ministry of Interior, with the National Command Center, which handled terrorism and what they called level 1 crime, which is organized crime, cross-border crime, those kinds of things. When we would get hit and we would lose a vehicle on the roadways or so on and so forth in our movements, we'd burn it in place. We were using up-armored Suburbans, up-armored Ford Excursions, and we just burn them in place. We didn't want the enemy to get something that it's pretty standard among the military. If we put an aircraft down somewhere, we'll remove the sensitive electronics. If we don't have enough time to remove the sensitive electronics, we'll use thermite grenades and we'll burn this thing to the ground. We don't want anybody to have anything. When you look at everything we left in Afghanistan, and you look at the numbers, of armored Humvees, you look at the number of armored personnel carriers.
Just guns.
You look at the aircraft, you look at there was no way to have enough people, enough munitions, enough thermite, enough anything
to destroy
all that. All right? I mean, let's face it, some of that, when we left Bagram in the middle of the night. The commander of the Afghan security forces that secured Bagram, hand in hand with the United States forces, what did he say the next day? The Americans are gone, and they didn't tell me. We just left. We loaded up. We left. We left parking lots full of vehicles lined up row after row. We left aircraft on the ground lined up row after row. We left armories full of ammunition. We left armories full of weapons. There was no way to, unless we'd have brought fast movers over and bombed it.
Yeah.
There was no way to do that stuff. There was no way to.
Well, why wouldn't you do that? Why wouldn't you bomb it?
Well, there were Afghan National Army forces on the ground working side by side with us,
so you don't want to hurt
maintaining
them.
security. We'd have to, we'd put a lot of people at risk. We'd have lost a bunch of Afghans, and that would really have gone over well in the world.
Well, we're not doing a big favor right now anyway, right? So it's like one forward, one back.
Yeah.
So we've turned our back on them anyway. So anybody that allied with us, and again, I don't know a whole lot, but you'd think that they're the first ones that the Taliban would go after, like, you were U.S. allies.
So
what happens to those people?
Yeah. Well, they're in hiding.
Right.
So what happens?
What do you fix? How do you fix it? Right.
We try to get them out, which is this Herculean effort that we've got going in spite of our own government. So what happens is you have people like Special Operations Force personnel, guys like me who spent time there. So what happens is as this begins to collapse, we had maintained, one of the things you never do, if you're a special ops guy and you go into a country and you establish networks and you establish relationships with people, when we do leave, we improve things, we don't give up those relationships because we may need them again in the future, right? So I still had personal contact with people that I'd worked with, Afghans that I'd worked with in Afghanistan. Just about every commander did. Every senior, every team member, every Green Beret who ever at the country, every SEAL ever at the country who worked with an interpreter, they would develop some kind of bond, and then we would continue that relationship over time. So as things started to collapse, people in Afghanistan began to reach out to me. And they said, hey, you got to get us out of here. This is what's happening. And that's happening with all kinds of former special operators. It's happening with all kinds of former. My former chaplain from my unit, who had deployed to Afghanistan a couple of times and trained chaplains for the Afghan National Army, Muslim mullahs and others, to be chaplains, how to be a chaplain and support the Afghan National Army. They're getting calls. I mean, say, hey, this is collapsing.
Anyone and everyone they can call.
Right. And some are getting murdered, and we're getting contacted by the family members. We're getting contacted by the son. We're getting contacted by the wife, by the daughters, and saying so-and-so was murdered by the Taliban. He was taken out, shot in the streets, and they're hunting us. How do we get... So all of a sudden things start springing up. Task Force Pineapple starts springing up in those last days. Freedom Alliance starts springing up. You got all these loose organizations, and they're reaching out to friends, to businesses, to corporations who are friendly with former military commanders and leaders. Keep in mind that many generals are on boards of major corporations and so on. And this loosely defined effort begins to extract people from Afghanistan, to put rat lines on the ground, put air routes in, do clandestine recoveries, identify key officials that are under threat, get them out. So,
but doesn't it seem like they're fighting the U.S. government on that behalf too? Because Biden just said, "Hey,
we were
no more."
The day before the airport fell, and so this effort gets semi-organized. I've got a team. We've been working now 17, 18 hours for 3 weeks, 2.5, almost 3 weeks now. All retired. When I say retired, we all have businesses. We all have
Sure.
other things to do. We have families to care for. But we're putting 16, 17, 18 hours a day in right now, trying to find ways, trying to find synergy with other groups to move people. Before the airport fell, we were able to get people out. We were able to get people out kind of wholesale. You had aircraft. You had Glenn Beck's effort, Mercury 1 landing airplanes in Kabul at Hamid Karzai International Airport, or HKIA, as we call it. And so what we were able to do is we were able to get key people at gates, and we were able to get word to families and to people. If you can get to this gate, we'll get you through. And so we were starting to do that, but the State Department started pushing back on that, saying, "Hey, look, we got to do this properly. We're saying there's no time," and they start refusing to enter. The day before HKIA fell, shut down. Okay. Well, the day before they stopped taking civilians and were only taking out military personnel, because the last 2 days they were only taking State Department and military personnel out. The day before, there's a bus. This bus was put together by one of my friends with another organization. There's a bus with 44 U.S. citizens with passports, right, in hand, at a gate for 9.5 hours, yelling and screaming, waving their passports. We're Americans. Suffering abuse from the Taliban, who are laughing at them, cursing them, slapping a few of them around, threatening some with guns for 9.5 hours. And the State Department would not authorize the military to let that bus onto the base. They got left. They're now in hiding in various places in Kabul. And the State Department tries to deny, all of this stuff. When the president comes out and he says, well, all U.S. citizens who wanted to get out got out, he's flat out lying. Right? But what he's trying to do is he's trying to paint a picture that those that are stuck there chose to be there. Mm-hmm. And many of them are Afghans.
Sure. And they don't want to be there either.
American citizenship. We've been there 20 years. Many Afghans have helped us to the level where we've been able to get them citizenship. I've got 3 of my former interpreters. 2 are here in the United States. 1 is in England, that we were able to help get the paperwork done over the years and get them here. They're all here. They're landed immigrants. They've got the right
that's awesome.
Green card holders. The 2 here. The one in England is now a citizen in England. It's their families I'm trying to get out. Their families were still stuck because they weren't able.
Friendlies.
Yeah, you can't get your U.S. paperwork done and then automatically bring your family over. There's a long period of time. There's applications. There's vetting. So the families are stuck. And so these are some of the people that I've got my team working on trying to get out. But once Kabul fell, that made it very hard. Once we closed down operations at HKIA, that ended. Now what we're getting at is we're getting trickles. We're getting a little bit here. We're able to find a smuggler network that'll take 3 or 4 or 5 people. The cost has gone up, and that's okay. A lot of people yell and scream about the opportunism, and I've seen people on the internet talking about sarcastically that capitalism is alive and well in Afghanistan because it's costing $65,000 to get 5 people out. It's costing $12,000 to get a person out, depending on which route you use and so forth. What they're not understanding is just to get what would normally be an 11-hour trip from Kabul, 4 hours to the border, another 2 hours. It would normally be about a 6-hour, if you could do it straight, 6 to 11-hour trip from Kabul to Peshawar in Pakistan. It takes 4 days. Because at certain points you have to hide. At certain points you have to wait until the next shift at that checkpoint. There are, as of yesterday, there were 12 checkpoints between Kabul, on the road between Kabul to Peshawar, to the border, on the Afghan border on the road to Peshawar. And so you have to wait until the right people, the ones you have an agreement with to bribe, you have to pay all along.
Every gate.
So you got to buy food, you got to rent safe houses, you got to pay gas for vehicles, you got to rent a vehicle in some cases, okay? And you've got to pay off officials, and that's not cheap. You've got to get Taliban at this checkpoint and that checkpoint to look the other way as you take your people through. And Afghans work all this stuff out.
Well, and 12,000 is not bad. They're paying that to come from Mexico almost. It's $10,000, right? I mean, and that's just a quick hop, right?
Yeah.
And So 12,000 it sounds expensive, but that is a human. So that's not
so,
expensive.
Yeah, so there is that question. What
right.
do you know?
What's the value?
What dollar?
Right.
You know,
and I don't think there is one. But the problem is that 12,000 of them might as well be a million.
no, absolutely.
You know,
Absolutely.
it's one thing to have 12,000 United States.
The biggest problem right now, I could get people out into Pakistan. I can get people into Tajikistan. I can get people into Uzbekistan. But the State Department's gone around and asked those countries not to accept Afghan.
Why would they do that, though? So that's on our side. It's really hard to hear that, and obviously believe, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying I don't, but
Yeah.
it's like, hey, how do you convince me that that's really what the United States would do? That's
I
never
think the
something
biggest
that
thing
we
they're
would
worried
do.
about is having to. Well, first they have to enter into agreements with these countries. They have to enter into agreements, and that means they have to pay. Right?
United States.
We have to set up camps. And we have to feed, house, and we have to do all the processing. So we got to move State Department personnel, large amounts of people in to do processing, to do fingerprints,
Which they're not ready
we have
to
to
do.
do biometric comparisons, because here's the opportunity for terrorists to move people into the United States. Depending on the type of application, first you have American citizens, all right, passport holders. Then you
Should
have
be right in, right?
green
That's our
card
job.
holders. 4 of the people I'm trying to get out have green cards. All right, I haven't been able to get them out yet. You would think that they'd be among the first who would get out. They were not. They were loaded twice on airplanes on HKA and kicked
moved.
off twice and kicked back outside the gates, and they end up getting stuck. So they're stuck. So you have, and then you have what they call SIVs, or special immigrant visas, and these are the ones that you applied for. You indicated that you essentially need asylum because there's a threat against your life. You have letters of support from.
I thought, wait a second, that's what Biden's supposed to support, right?
Yeah,
We need
think.
all the asylum holders, the seekers, and that's what we want.
Right. And so this SIV, you have to have a letter of support from military members or American diplomats that you worked with, those kinds of things that support the threat and support the movement of personnel. So you have that piece. And then you have people who didn't have time to get any of that. You have the next level of application in terms of asylum and getting to the United States. It's called P1 and P2 applications, and they're based on certain criteria. And a P1 or P2, you cannot apply to the embassy in the country where you live. You must go to a third country, right? You must go through the processing, and you must be 1 year in that other country to go through, to allow the State Department to do the full vetting process, look at you, ensure that you're not connected to a variety of things which are not good for the United States. And then you can be moved to a reception center in the United States and go through some processing and be released to families or cities or wherever their groups will take you. So in order to do that, and there are thousands of Afghans who fit the criteria, thousands and thousands that fit the criteria after 20 years serving there, of us being there, who fit the criteria. That's an immense project. And I think the State Department's just saying, look, we can't do this. We can't handle it. So please don't accept them, because we don't have the means or the will or the administrative directives to do this. So don't do it. And then, of course, you've got the 2022 midterm elections looming. Campaigning will start pretty heavily here in the fall and early winter.
Which could potentially give horsepower to one side or the other.
Well,
right?
and so one of the considerations, word is from the pundits and those who study this stuff, is that Democrats are scared to death about the 2022 midterm elections, because this administration has not done well in anything. If you look across, and if you measure effect and you look at performance, hasn't done well at anything. And there are questions about leadership, and there are questions about capabilities, and there are questions about who's actually in charge, and there are all these questions. So you have this spinning kind of administration thing, and so if they could calm this down, if they could get this horrendous situation that they caused, if they could get that.
Do you think they're nervous about it, or do you think they're just fine with how it is?
Oh no, they're scared to death.
They seem fine with it. When Biden talks, he's like, "Oh, it's a win."
Well, they're trying to paint it in a favorable light. They're trying to spin it into a favorable light. We know it's not true. So,
I completely agree with you.
Yeah.
Because when you look at everything else, there was a guy they were flying American helicopters hanging people with the other day, right? they were showing that. Is that
well,
a real
I'm not
video
sure.
or no?
I'm not sure that's true. I'm not
Okay.
sure that is. I'm not sure that's a true representation or image. Do I know that the Taliban are killing people? Yes, because I've had people on the
Couldn't
ground
say it.
call me and tell me, look, they just took so-and-so out of my neighbor's house, shot him in the street. I believe them.
Sure.
Right?
Media, you can't believe anything right
Yeah,
now.
we know that. We know the story about the pregnant policewoman who was shot and killed in front of her family. We know that's true. It's documented by the press who were on the ground. Foreign press, but, I mean, they're vetted. We know those things are true. The thing about the helicopters, I didn't like.
The video, for one.
Well, I didn't like the way it looked. It kind of reminded me of the Sasquatch sighting stuff, where stuff is a little bit blurred and so on and so forth. And I didn't like the way the individual was hanging. The way his body was hanging.
Didn't look right.
It didn't look right for someone who's been hung around the neck and is dead. So,
Got it.
but I'm not saying it isn't. But I'm not saying it is, because I like to have better
facts.
corroboration.
You mean Facebook's not a fact?
Yeah.
There's checkers.
I've fallen prey to Facebook a couple of times by getting emotional and grabbing
Sure.
onto something and shipping it out. And
It's
then
fun, though.
Then have somebody point out to me that, it's crazy. So, and you know me, as we've talked before, I try to keep emotion out of all this stuff. The effort, huge stuff going on. We're doing this, all the groups, not just me, all the groups, we're doing this in spite of the U.S. administration. We're working out deals of our own. Part of a team I'm working with was in negotiation with key Uzbek leaders yesterday, not involving our State Department, not involving our military. So we have, retired people, high-level people. We have all these good Americans, all these patriots who are saying, look, this isn't right. We got to make this right for our brothers and sisters in Afghanistan. And we're all working together, and we're having small wins, and we're going to continue to have small wins. At the strategic level, we're trying to bring everything out into the light so it forces the State Department and essentially the presidential administration to change their position on this and get fully on board and moving it. Based on some of the things that we've done, you saw Representative Walz yesterday on the news talking about the State Department should be grabbing onto this public-private partnership. You've got all these groups out there willing to put, their people in harm's way, willing to put the effort in, willing to rent the helicopters, willing to do the things necessary. So the State Department should play their role, and they should establish the camps for processing, and they should allow these teams to public-private partnership. That verbiage is directly out of some strategic thinking and planning we were doing and then disseminating as groups, as large groups, to our representatives. I've written letters to our congressional delegation here in Utah. Congressman Stewart and Congressman Moore have helped me with some of the stuff, but they've also said, look, we can only take this so far because we're getting pushback from State Department. State Department is not agreeing or allowing certain things to occur, but we're putting pressure on your behalf. Mike Lee's doing a tremendous job bringing this stuff to light and putting pressure on. And so I think I'm hoping to see change. But in the meantime, we're continuing forward. Private money is being utilized.
And needed.
It's huge. It's huge. These to get people out has a cost to it, and it's all in dollars. I have a plan underway. I have a good plan in place, but I'm not able to execute because I need $250,000 to get this. But I think there's a 70% chance, which is a very high outcome in terms of what's going on. I think I've got a 70% chance of getting 300 people out for $250,000. So it's just a matter of finding the money, because a lot of people are reaching out looking for that. A lot of GoFundMes have been set up. I think people are starting to get a little bit wary about donating. But
so on the Glenn Beck one, he did, a $20 million round, right? That they ended up raising amazing quick. I mean, really, really fast.
Right.
Why did he have to go dark? He says, hey, we have to go dark. We're working in the background. Do you know why he had to say that?
Well, one of the things that's happening, some of the stuff in the planning involves activities that would be suspect, and they're done, friendships. If we've essentially become, if I move people to Pakistan, from Kabul to Pakistan,
human smugglers,
move them into a safe house, move them forward, to the southern beaches, bring a boat in, pick them up, take them to a humanitarian center in another country, I'm technically violating a bunch of laws, right?
Right.
If I fly a helicopter from Tajikistan into Afghanistan, and I pick up people and I take them back to Tajikistan, I have Tajikistan's support. But what are they doing? They're looking the other way at the invasion of a sovereign airspace and sovereign land of a country. Now, there is no government in place. There is no, and we haven't officially recognized Afghanistan, and which, if we recognize the legitimacy of the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, we're never going to survive that internationally. There's no way. If we let a government that we put in there
Get overridden.
the IGOA, get taken down by bandits and terrorists, and they put their own government in place, and we recognize them, we establish relations, which is a formal process, and we put an embassy back in there, all right, we may as well give it up in other parts of the world, because that's just an absolute failure.
Yeah. Just shows that you don't have to listen.
It shows you're a fair weather friend, and it shows you go with whichever way the tide is going. And Afghanistan, it's in our national interest. We keep talking about national interest. National interests are what further the ability, capability of a nation. Okay? For instance, it had been in our national interest to protect the oil supply coming out of Saudi Arabia and Venezuela and other countries that were coming to the United States and allowing us to continue. So it was in our national interest to protect Saudi Arabia from Iraq back in the 90s. It was our national interest initially to try to uphold the government in Venezuela because of oil and the kinds of things. It was our national. We talk about our national interest. Well, that's the underlying foundational governance piece that's important throughout the world, is protecting national interest. It's not in our national interest to allow China to control the mines and the lithium supplies in Afghanistan.
Not when we're there.
Yeah.
Just give it to them.
Now we're just turning it over. It was not in our national interest in terms of regional hegemony and the situation, the Asian situation. It was not in our national interest to give up our foothold in Afghanistan. It was not in our national interest to allow the government in Afghanistan to fail. No, it wasn't a Jeffersonian democracy, and it never would be a Jeffersonian democracy. That's a unique situation to the United States. But it could have been a growing and effective economy. It could have been a growing and effective governance. It could have been growing and effective national stabilization program for that whole region. And our presence would have an effect on the whole region.
Don't you think it's funny that they tried it for 20 years and it failed? Well, it takes longer than 20 years.
Well, no, it takes longer than 20 years, but keep in mind, we never solidified our goals for Afghanistan. We never identified exactly, we never developed a long-term strategic plan, and it's hard to do when administrations change every 4 years, particularly when they are so diametrically opposed to each other.
Yeah, completely opposite.
Yes,
polar opposites.
Yeah. So, and you have the underlying foundational basis for their philosophy and their ideology and what they're doing.
Which for China's an edge, right? Because they have one guy that can march his plan for. Right. 30, 40 years, whatever that is.
So, I mean, when the guy that you supported to be president, that you helped be president, and that, I mean, they had an election, and it was a good election, and they elected him president. But as Kabul starts to fall, he heads for Qatar, and he takes $170 million from the National Treasury with him. Why does that occur? What does that speak? Right? Yeah, he was the president of Afghanistan. And then the other piece is, I mean, if you look historically, the other piece is Afghanistan, interesting dynamic. My maternal grandfather emigrated to the United States in 1911 from Afghanistan. So I'm 1/4 Pashtun. Whatever that means. That's just my genealogy. I've been a Canadian and an American my whole life.
Right.
So I've been a Christian my whole life. My genealogical roots go to Afghanistan. But when my grandfather came over in 1911, the borders of Afghanistan were different than they are today. Following World War I, I believe it was 1919, in one of those agreements, we divided up the Middle East and created the borders. Well, the Taliban are part of the alliance of Pashtun tribes. My grandfather was a Pashtun. He was a Pathan. His tribal allegiances were Pathan, Pathan, which is a form of Pashtun. In the minds of the Pashtun, there's still a nation called Pashtunistan, and it's eastern Afghanistan and western Pakistan. My grandfather came from the Swat River Valley. When he grew up, he was born in either 1880 or 1882. We don't know because he didn't know, and there were documents that said, those 2 days. He didn't know how old he was. He knew roughly how old he was, but and he came from the village of Makboon in the Swat River Valley. Well, in 1919, when they moved the borders, that became part of Pakistan. That's just inside Pakistan. But my grandfather said, borders irrelevant. That's Afghanistan. And so the Western powers kind of made the region and identified borders and and made things the way they are. And they're not, and keep in mind that these tribes, these peoples, they place great stock in their history going as far back as they can remember. So they've been independent and they've been dealing with invaders since time began. Many people have tried to conquer Afghanistan and been unable to do it. The longest that held it, I think it was Genghis Khan. It was the Mongols who held that region to some degree for about 300 years. Alexander the Great had a great impact on it, but he was only there, I think, 26 or 27 years. So you had Chinese invasions, you had Mongol invasions, you had Greek and Roman invasions, you had all these invasions, and then the Afghans just put up with it. That there's that saying that you hear about, and it's true because they would say this to me. In fact, I will tell you that that one of the warlords, very powerful warlord that I was meeting regularly with, the warlord of the Zadran tribe, his name was Pachakan Zadran, big warlord who helped the Americans defeat the Soviets. And anyway, Pachakan said to me, he said, "You guys won't stay. No one has stayed. Lots of people have made promises to Afghanistan, never stayed. You won't stay." And he's right. And there's that saying that the Afghans have, the Americans have all the watches, but we have all the time. And it's true. We do things in very short periods of time. Look, we've been arguing for 17 years that we should be out of Afghanistan. But nobody determined and set the conditions
on how to leave,
in which we would leave stability, in which we would be able to protect our national interests, and how we would leave Afghanistan. And as politicians revolved through various offices, plans changed.
Along with the agendas, right?
We suck as a nation at long-term strategy. And we've gotten worse and worse and worse at it.
Isn't that sad?
It is.
So back to your plan. How do you see that working? What is a process that we can help you figure out how to take care of 300 humans? What does that look like for us? And I think that's more urgent. Like we're talking weeks.
Oh,
isn't
we're talking
that amount
days.
of time.
We're talking days. For me, it's fundraising. For me, it's in order, for that plan, it's coming up with $250,000. For across this whole effort, it's money because you have to. These things, airplanes cost stuff. Helicopters cost stuff. Buses cost stuff. Bribes. And by the way, a bribe to us is a bad word. In Asia, it's just business.
Right.
It's just business. When I was working in Iraq, and we would talk about, contractors trying to get contracts to build things, U.S. contractors trying to get, and they would talk about bakshish, and to Americans would pound the table and say, well, that's bribery. There's no word in Arabic for bribery. Bakshish is essentially a set of fees for us to do business together. It's not viewed the same way. It's not viewed the same way at all. So the reality of that region and everything is money is the big deal. Then the second largest thing is to put significant political pressure on so that the administration changes its point of view about how to deal with the Afghans that we need to get out of there, how we deal with our brothers and sisters who supported us for so many years and whose families are at risk, and create the processes and the camps and the various things necessary, accept that their solution to Afghanistan has created this problem, accept responsibility for the problem,
And help fix it.
And fix it.
Yeah, that's concerning to me. I mean, if a U.S. passport holder, to me, that is the number one obligation of the United States. And the commander-in-chief, right, that was the initial role of him, was to be over the military to help the states align in their decisions, if I'm not mistaken, right? And where's he? Right, that should be, look, I don't care we have one American on the ground. If it was because of an American operation that he's there, then we need to make American operations to get him out. One.
Yes.
Let alone multiple.
There's another piece to this, to Jeremy, and that is this. We're not going to solve this in a month. We're not going to solve this in 10 months. This is going to take several years. Guys like me, my team, we're committed until the last Afghan is out.
So how do they help your team?
I don't know if I can keep the pace of 17-hour days, but we're committed until we get the last one out.
So
we made a promise.
Yeah.
We're going to live with that promise.
How do we help? What's the best way? And the next question I'm going to ask is question of, is it legal? Can you help this operation?
Yeah, it is legal.
It's not a deal.
Mercury One, Glenn Beck's, they're taking donations. They raised $20 million something in donations.
Crazy.
In very short period of time. Everybody else, it's all legal. It is legal. That's the first thing. Second thing is, start putting pressure on your elected representatives and asking them to continue to put pressure on the administration to change their stance on.
Well, I think it's easy for us to get complacent, right? We sit here in our comfortable homes, and I have a great job, and I work with great people every day. Yeah. It's pretty easy for me not to pay attention to Afghanistan or other Americans. But what if we just changed shoes for just 5 minutes and say, hey, you're over there, we're over here in our cushy chairs, and all it would take is a phone call, an email, some pressure. You'd probably hope that that person would do it. Right? You'd hope that the Americans that are here are helping you get back and that you're concerned enough and not just written off because you're not here.
I talk to my families every day. Every day I get 2 or 3 texts, secure texts from Afghanistan on the ground describing the conditions and begging me to get them out. I had one yesterday saying, they were next door, Taliban was next door, they took so-and-so away, please, they're right here, please get us out. It's heart-wrenching. I mean, the stress of this is on everybody. The stress of this is incredible. I had one of my associates, one of the people they were trying to get out, was taken out murdered. We have it. We know it. They were taken out murdered by the Taliban. I could tell you story after story of those exact things, and they were murdered because they supported us. They rolled the dice and said, I'm going to go in on the side of the Americans. And I can't think of a greater violation of our promises and our core identity as Americans than to leave these people on the ground to fend for themselves. And they have no ability to do that against some of the most evil, I'm trying not to use a bad word, some of the most evil
individuals.
Individuals, some of them, they're doing the work of the devil. It's just...
And you know what? It's different to sit here. You watch what the media wants to feed you, and then you've had the opportunity to be on the ground and see it and help us understand more at a ground level of what that looks like. You don't see it. We sit there, we watch TV, and we're like, well, that looks like that's a mess, and we're probably right and they're wrong.
Well, what's kind of interesting to me is if you look at the players, you look at Tim Kennedy, he was on the ground. You look at the various groups and who are with those groups and who are there. Everything from Tim Ballard from Operation Underground Railroad, he's running Beck's effort. All that stuff on the ground that's occurring, and who's behind it all? It's all U.S. service members who served, and who believe in the promises we made, and they're backed up by corporations and people who believe in the American identity, that we don't leave anybody behind.
And I think there's more great Americans than there are less of
Yes.
that, right? I think there's more people that believe what you said
Yes.
than the opposite.
Yes.
And that's what's exciting about Americans, whether they're showing that on TV or not. I think even Ken will be the first to proudly wear an American shirt, right? I mean, we all identify in the same family, and I think it's a brotherhood and sisterhood that's amazing. And unfortunately, we got 2% of the population that hold a microphone that want us to believe different.
Yeah.
And I know we have the opportunity to ride in airplanes and buses and just be on the streets every day with our fellow Americans.
Yep.
And I would say that by far large majority love each other, regardless of what the news
Absolutely.
wants to
Absolutely.
say. They can play the racism card, the woke card, or whatever. But when it all comes down to it, and I have to sit by whoever on the bus, guess what? I love that person anyway. They may have a view that's opposing to mine, but I didn't grow in their shoes. Right? I wasn't there. I don't know how they started. I don't know where they got there. But I really enjoy the conversations with most. I have yet, fortunately, knock on wood, yet to meet a really mean person that I wouldn't want to hang out for 3.5 hours on a plane to Atlanta or whatever, right?
I don't know that you're capable of being that, because one of the things that people like us, in this room, is we're strong in our own identities, and we don't feel a need to act or to do certain things.
Yeah.
There's nothing to be gained from that. Nothing at all to be gained from that. We stand strong in our principles, and we go from there.
Well, and I'm proud more than anything to be American. I'm proud to have people that represented America like you, Randy, and the career that you've sacrificed, whether you feel like it was a sacrifice or not, because from our side, I could say you're really proud of that sacrifice, which is great and thankful.
I wouldn't change a thing.
I'm sure you wouldn't.
change a thing.
And we're thankful for that. And
Paying the price for it physically,
Well, sure. Not true, by the way.
I call
true.
it paying for the exuberance of my youth.
Well, no, you should see your exuberance at the gym. I'm still at like 40% of what you're doing. He comes over to me.
You just don't know how much it hurts.
He's like, "Are you going to stop talking and work out today?" I'm like, "Really? I just was talking for 4 seconds. Leave me alone."
Yeah.
So, well,
All right,
thank
brother.
you so much, Randy, for being here, and everybody again. 90 Proof Wisdom podcast here, and we really appreciate you. And we'd love to have comments and concerns and questions. Again, you can reach out to me. It's 90proofwisdom@gmail.com. Thanks for
bless you.
listening. Hey, God bless you
my
guys,
friend.
and God bless everybody. Have a great one. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to 90 Proof Wisdom Podcast. Hopefully there was a takeaway for you. If you like what we're doing or even our efforts, tell your friends about it. Let us know what we could do better. Again, thank you for listening to 90 Proof Wisdom Podcast. Don't forget to smash that subscribe button.